Some people not forget, but their imagination doesn't quite grasp what is Gaza. Gaza is, if you'll allow me, Aaron, it's in length, it's the size of a marathon. A marathon, using American measurements, it's 26.2 miles. The length of Gaza is 25 miles. You know what the width of Gaza is? I mean, you can't even believe this when you start thinking about it. You know what the width of Gaza is? Gaza is twice the length, its width is twice the length of Central Park. Central Park goes from 59th Street to 125th Street. That's 3 miles. Gaza is 5 miles in width. So it's a marathon by 2 Central Parks.
With 2 million people.
And there are 2 million people, 1 million plus children. Children.
You've written about how, in your view, under international law, Hamas has every right to fire these rockets. It's been occupied by Israel for decades. Israel's made no effort to end the occupation. In fact, it's entrenched the occupation and imposed this medieval siege on Gaza. And I accept that view, and I imagine many people out there who are watching this will accept that view too, that Hamas has the right to defend itself, to defend Gaza from Israel. But strategically, do you have a sense of what Hamas's strategy is? Because they chose to intervene in the Israeli assault in Jerusalem during the theft of Palestinian homes in Sheikh Jarrah, and Hamas intervened by launching these rockets and responding to that and making demands. But certainly they know that that is going to lead to Israel declaring a so-called right to self-defense and punishing Gaza, and especially punishing Gaza's civilians. So do you have a sense of what Hamas's strategy was in going about all this?
Whenever I hear this question of does Israel have a right to defend itself, I find the question so perplexing, so positively weird, that question. In 2003, Baruch Kimmerling, who was a senior sociologist at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, he wrote a book called Politicide. It was about the tenure of Ariel Sharon as Prime Minister of Israel. And at some point in the book, he turns to the question of Gaza, and he writes that Gaza is, quote, the largest concentration camp ever. The largest concentration camp ever. Now, it's not just a phrase that he chose. Remember, it's an Israeli Jew for whom concentration camp has resonance. Remember that he was a senior member of the Hebrew University Sociology Department, and probably the most respected sociologist at the Hebrew University. For our purposes, the real point is that was 2003. That was before Israel imposed that brutal, inhuman, illegal blockade of Gaza. The blockade didn't come until 2006, when the people of Gaza exercised their democratic right in an election, but they elected, from the point of view of the US and Israel, the wrong party to power. And so they had to be punished.
Hillary Clinton even said that we shouldn't have let the Palestinians vote.
Right. Exactly. And that's when the blockade in its current incarnation began, with that election in January 2006, the election that Jimmy Carter called a fully fair and free election. So, to make the story short, Baruch Kimmerling was calling Gaza the largest concentration camp ever, when Gaza was a pale comparison, when it comes to misery, a pale comparison to what it became after 2006 and what it's been for the last 15 years. Now, what is Gaza? We know its size. A marathon by 2 Central Parks. We know its demography. It's a majority children under the age of 18. We know its history. 70% are refugees who already lost their homes in Israel, what became Israel, and they went from losing their homes to being confined, trapped in a concentration camp. You say, why don't they use nonviolent means to free themselves? Well, that's what they did in 2018 during the Great March of Return. They engaged in overwhelmingly nonviolent civil resistance to try to end the siege of Gaza. What happened? As the whole world averted its gaze premeditatedly, Israel situated snipers along the periphery, and they targeted children, medics, journalists, disabled people. So, you ask the question. The question is always put, doesn't Israel have the right to defend itself? I put the question differently. I pose it as a different rhetorical question. My rhetorical question to Bernie Sanders, for whom I have the highest regard, not least because he attended my high school, for whom I have the highest regard, for Omar Shaker, for whom I have the highest regard plus, because he's been really outstanding the past week, for Haggai Elad, for whom I have the highest regard plus, because I'm saying these things from my apartment in Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn. Now, admittedly, it's an all-Jewish neighborhood and a lot of crazy Russians here, but still, it's Ocean Parkway, Brooklyn. He's saying it from Israel. So in terms of physical courage, we're in different leagues. I acknowledge that. But I say to all of them, you all use the rhetorical question, doesn't Israel have the right to self-defense? I ask you this question, do concentration camp guards have the right to self-defense? That to me is a very perplexing question because the answer is just perfectly obvious. Do concentration camp guards have the right to self-defense? If you read the new Human Rights Watch report, it says that Israel is committing, as we speak, it's committing crimes against humanity in Gaza. Now, what does that mean? It means the forcible eviction of Palestinians from their homes in 1948, the denial of them of the right to return to their homes, that's a crime against humanity under international law. That's level one. Level two, on top of that crime against humanity, the very same people who were evicted, the very same people who were victims of a crime against humanity, which in international law ranks higher than a war crime. As Human Rights Watch says, it, meaning crimes against humanity, are, quote, among the most odious crimes in international law. Among the most odious. So, 70% of the population of Gaza or their descendants have suffered a crime against humanity, their eviction from their homes, the forcible eviction of them from their homes. Then they are confined to this space the size of one marathon by 2 Central Parks. They are confined to this space, denied freedom of movement to leave and to re-enter Gaza. According to Human Rights Watch, that too is a crime against humanity. That's a second crime on top of the first crime. And then the same people who suffer the first crime against humanity, the second crime against humanity, and then on top of that, every few years Israel goes in to mow the lawn in Gaza. It's massacres. It calls them mowing the lawn. Operation Cast Lead 2008-9, Operation Pillar of Defense 2012, Operation Protective Edge 2014, and now a new operation in Gaza. A third crime against humanity. A third crime against humanity. And then you ask the question, does Israel have the right to defend itself? That question means, as I understand it, having read the Human Rights Watch reports, having read the Human Rights Watch reports, having read the B'Tselem reports, having read all the Human Rights reports, that question means to me, Does Israel have the right to commit crimes against humanity? Now look, Aaron, I'm not being rhetorical. You see, here's the problem. I take seriously what the Human Rights Watch reports say. I take them seriously. According to Human Rights Watch, the Palestinian refugees have the right of return. I'm not making that argument. I'm not making that argument. It's Human Rights Watch that made the argument. And so, if that's factually true, which is what Human Rights Watch says,
and
then,
so does the United Nations. There's a General Assembly resolution.
I'm taking, mainstream centrist American organization, Human Rights Watch. So, I say if that's true, then the Palestinian refugees, of which 70% of the Gaza population consists of, they've been suffering a crime against humanity for 73 years. That's what I understand the report to be saying. And then they've been suffering, they say, the lack of freedom of movement in Gaza, the inability to go in and go out, and the denial of allowing goods to go in and go out, that too is a crime against humanity. They've suffered that for 15 years, since 2006. And now, to me, the question becomes, and honestly, I would like to ask Bernie Sanders, I would like to ask Omar Shaker, who I like. I would like to ask Hagai Alad, for whom I have the highest regard, second to none. I would like to ask them, do you think Israel has the right to commit crimes against humanity? If it does not have that right, then the people of Gaza have the right to use whatever means are at their disposal to free themselves from that concentration camp. They have every right, not just to free them, but to free their children, those 1 million children, from that concentration camp in Gaza. I can't see another argument. I would be I hate to play the Holocaust card. But I would be betraying everything I learned from my parents if I said concentration camp guards had the right to self-defense. I swear my mother should smack me in the face. What are you talking about? These are children. A right to self-defense? You have the right to confine children to a concentration camp? Listen to those words. You have the right to trap children in a concentration camp? That's what you're saying when you say Israel has the right to self-defense. That's concretely what it means. Israel is defending its right to maintain that blockade of Gaza. That's what it's doing. It's defending its right to maintain that blockade of Gaza. Can any sane person believe that Israel has the right to trap 1 million children in a concentration camp? I think that's crazy. I think it's insane.
Okay, but going back to my question. So again, accepting your premise as I do, that Hamas has every right to fire these rockets because it's defending itself from the Israeli occupation and siege. And Israel has no so-called right to defend itself because it is, as you say, attacking a concentration camp. Is there a Hamas strategy? Because you also said earlier that these rockets, although they've improved a little bit, are still not that effective. So I'm wondering, as we close, do you have a sense of what the Hamas strategy is here?
No. And you know what, Aaron? I don't pretend to be what I'm not. I live in Brooklyn, New York. I've never been in the military. I've never studied military history. I don't want to pretend to be what I'm not. I'm not a tactician. I'm not a strategist. What I would say to you is this, Aaron, and we'll leave it at that. Mahatma Gandhi, many people know about his opposition to violence, but people don't know about the caveats he entered. So I'm going to say to you this, Aaron. Gandhi says there are certain kinds of violence which, when you look at the violence by comparison, relative to the violence of your oppressor, the violence is so trivial by comparison. Gandhi said, I don't consider that violence. So he gives the following two examples. He says a woman who is being raped. When a woman is being raped, he says she scratches the rapist. She pummels the rapist. Gandhi said, I don't consider that violence. He says that's a woman struggling to find the dignity to suffer this violent assault on herself. No strategy, Aaron. No strategy, no calculation. It's the human struggle for a kind of dignity to resist this barbarian. And then he said, Poland in 1939. Poland faced the Wehrmacht, the German army, the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. It had a few weapons, a few tanks, a few bazookas, a few artillery. They fired it. Gandhi said, I don't think that's violence. He did. I mean, I know Gandhi. I mean, his work, obviously not him personally, though I've met his granddaughter. He said, that's not violence. He says, when you compare the two, he says, the Poles, this is their way of showing dignity when their nation is coming under assault. So now let's return to Hamas and the current round. The Israelis, they're evicting the families from East Jerusalem in Sheikh Jarrah. East Jerusalem is the Palestinian capital under international law. West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem designated as the capital of the future state of Palestine. They see these Palestinian families being evicted. Obviously, it has a resonance for a population that's 70% refugees.
They also see Al-Aqsa Mosque being attacked as well.
Then it's Ramadan. It's Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's the holiest night of Al-Aqsa Mosque. And they see these barbarians barge in and start attacking the worshippers. I think personally, as a matter of dignity, I don't know the calculation. When you read the Israeli news, the Israeli press, everybody is a strategist, everybody's a theoretician, they all know what Hamas is thinking. I don't know what Hamas is thinking. And you know what? I don't care what Hamas is thinking. I honestly don't. I think as a matter of national dignity, they should have reacted. They should have reacted. Now, a more cautious leadership, like the Iranian leadership, like the Hezbollah leadership, they've suffered many Israeli provocations, and they didn't react. The Israelis assassinate the leading Iranian nuclear scientist. They didn't react. The Israelis assassinated the beloved general, Soleimani. I can't remember his name. They didn't react. The Israelis blow up part of the Natanz nuclear reactor. They didn't react. Hezbollah suffered many significant losses in personnel due to Israeli assassinations. They didn't react. Okay, they're more cautious, they're more calculated, they're more patient. But if they did react, if they had reacted, I would have supported them. Israel doesn't have the right to assassinate scientists. So I don't know what Hamas's calculation is. I don't pretend to know. I have no pipeline to Hamas. I don't talk to Hamas leaders. But I don't really care. They had the right to defend their holy sites, their capital, and in the background, they had the right to launch rockets against that merciless state that has the whole population of Gaza trapped in a concentration camp. And that's all I care about. I'm not going to pretend to be a strategist or a tactician. I care about the basic moral and legal right to defend yourself against this state that is inflicting compounded crimes against humanity, against a population confined in a space the size of a marathon by 2 Central Parks.
Norman Finkelstein, we'll leave it there. Author, scholar, his many books include Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom. Norman, thank you.
You're welcome.